So the final presentation for today is by Kiri Dalena, who is an acclaimed visual artist and filmmaker known internationally for her works that lay bare the social inequalities and injustices that continue to persist, particularly in the Philippines. Her active involvement in the mass struggle to uphold human rights amid state persecution is the foundation for her art practice that underscores the relevance of protest and civil disobedience in contemporary society. Dalena's works are both documentation and critical commentary on the historical and the current state of national political affairs. Requiem for M tackles one of the most brutal murders of journalists in the world, the Maguindanao Massacre, and the culture of impunity that plagues the Philippines. A recipient of the CCP 13 Artists Award and Ateneo Art Awards, Dalena has also been featured in several international art events such as the Singapore Biennale, Yokohama Triennale, the Fukuoka Asian Art Triennale, and the Asia Pacific Triennale of Contemporary Art. Her presentation today is Requiem for M and the Right to Filmic Refusal. Can we please welcome Kiri Dalena?
Thank you very much, Paul, for the introduction. So yes, I'm Kiri Dalena, and I've been invited to speak about a specific work, a short film that I did almost 10 years ago, Requiem for M, which I think is very much connected to the theme of the Memory Conference, which is liberty of the press and democracy. So I was told that I should, I'm more of a practicing filmmaker, and I was told that I could speak about my work as an artist, collaborating with journalists, so intersections of cinema and journalism. Requiem for M, this is a still image from the film. It's a scene from a mass grave where the families and colleagues of journalists release balloons to the sky as a symbolic gesture. But I assume that memory has failed many of us, and I'll just give a background about the massacre. So in 2 weeks, it will be 9 years since the Maguindanao Massacre, also known as the Ampatuan Massacre incident that took place in the province of Maguindanao. Okay, sorry. So the Maguindanao Massacre took place 9 years ago on November 23, 2009 in the island of Mindanao in the Philippines. The incident took the lives of 58 persons. The 58 persons were part of a convoy of 6 vehicles transporting civilians who were on their way to file the certificate of candidacy of a politician named Esmael Mangudadatu, a vice mayor who intended to challenge the dynasty of a ruling political clan called the Ampatuans in the forthcoming elections of the following year. This is a photograph of the politician, Mangudadatu, and his wife, Jenalyn. So Mangudadatu knew that he was up against a very powerful family and decided not to file his candidacy himself. So he got the cooperation of his relatives, primarily women relatives, his wife, Jenalyn, his 2 sisters who were both pregnant, women aides, lawyers, as well as a large contingent of journalists. They believed that by having women and journalists traveling, they would be protected. So these are some of the IDs of the media persons who joined. And then this is the lawyer, Connie Brizuela. In the end, before reaching the office of the Commission on Elections in another town, the convoy was blocked by a group of over 100 armed men. The path of the convoy was forcibly diverted to a remote hill, and where the group of 58 people were massacred. If you would see the photograph, this came out. This is a regional paper, and this came out on November 24, the following day. At this time, they only identified 24 media men, because what happened was, it was a very well-planned massacre. Behind, you will see an excavator, or what we would call a backhoe. The backhoe belongs to the provincial government, and it prepared a pit, a grave for the individuals as well as the vehicles. So the perpetrators attempted to bury all of the bodies as well as the 6 vehicles, which they crushed using the excavator. The excavator broke down, so they were not able to finish hiding the massacre, and there were about 24 bodies above the ground. So the first report was there were about 24 persons killed. Then eventually we found out that there were 58 individuals. So of the 58 individuals, 32 have been identified to be journalists and media workers. Okay, I will just quote something from the Philippine Daily Inquirer, which came out with the editorial. So we will retrace their steps, those early hours before their shocking extinction, when they, at least 27 journalists, set out for a day's work. We will piece together the bloody shards of the crime, the point in the highway in Ambatuan country where the convoy in which they were part of was waylaid, the guns that snuffed them out, the grassy field where they, along with the rest of the unfortunate lot, breathed their last. We will keep asking the terrible question, how could this have happened? The mass murder? Okay. The mass murder in Maguindanao on November 23rd has come to define our generation as journalists. Nowhere in our history as an endangered breed has a similar occurrence approached a degree of enormity or the body count been so outrageously high. Yet a more significant aspect casts a large shadow on the crime, the climate of impunity that served as a ground for it to happen. So this is an image of Dato Unsay Mayor and prime suspect Andal Apatuan Jr. During the time, just to give a background, during the time of the massacre in 2009, the Press Freedom Group, the Committee to Protect Journalists, which annually publishes a global impunity index ranking states with the worst records of prosecuting the killers of journalists, consistently ranked the Philippines 3rd during the time of the massacre, preceded only by the likes of Iraq. Around the time of the massacre, the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines also recorded 146 journalists killed in the Philippines since 1986, when Corazon Aquino came to power in a popular uprising that overthrew the dictatorship of Marcos. It is important to note that of the 146 killed journalists, there were only 10 convictions. And those convictions were only gunmen and lookouts. No mastermind has ever been convicted. And also at the time of the massacre, there were only 15 active cases on the media killings. Also during the time of the massacre, there were only 10 active cases on the media killings. Okay. In 2009, media also cited that as many as 68 journalists have been killed during the time of President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, and singled out an event where her husband, the first gentleman, Mike Arroyo, who was then being investigated by the media for his alleged links to illegal gambling, publicly addressed journalists in another part of the Philippines. He said, "No journalists in Negros have been killed because journalists here are responsible reporters." So this was the climate that we were in. Okay, so these are just some of the images that the gravestones that I took. Okay. Okay. So the Maguindanao massacre is considered to be the deadliest attack against journalists in Philippine history and the worst single attack against journalists in the world in recent history, including the journalist Reynaldo Momay, whose remains were never found, the number of journalists and media workers killed in this incident are as many as 32 out of the 58. So a few days after the massacre, I was invited by a journalist, Patricia Evangelista, to join her, a writer for Philippine Daily Inquirer, to join her. I remember she told me that there were no, they were mostly writers and photographers there, and there were no moving documentary filmmakers using videos. So I have been working with her previously on when it comes to themes about human rights, including a case against a general, Jovito Palparan, who was responsible for the disappearance of activist students. So she invited me to follow her in Maguindanao, and we used our own funds. So she left earlier, and I was left alone in Maguindanao, and she told me to get in touch with the journalists there, both the ones based in Maguindanao as well as the national media people. But in the end, I ended up traveling or covering alone. There were nuances regarding coverage, which I admit I was naive, and as a filmmaker, I was not included. I was not allowed to join the journalists when they were covering. So what happened was I went on my own and discovered the victims of the massacre who were not journalists, so the civilians. So we sort of broke the news that amongst the 58, there were included in the convoy were vehicles which were not part of the journalists or the group. And then I didn't go to the site which was covered by the journalists, but I went more to the funerals, the wakes, and met the families. So these are just many of the gravestones of the journalists who have been killed in Mindanao. So this includes the journalists killed on November 23, 2009, and even all of these are from November 23, 2009. And then just a few days after the massacre, because outside of the people who were doing news for television, I was the only documentary photographer there. So we produced Patricia as the writer and me as the editor and director and cinematographer, a short documentary called Under One Sky. This is just a trailer. Okay, so this was shown on the ABS-CBN News Channel, a mainstream group, and it was very rough. But I think because I was the only one who was able to produce something, they showed it. Eventually, I also made with Patricia another documentary called 58. So we worked together from 2009 to 2011. But in early 2010. In early 2010, the ABS-CBN News Channel also came up with a project called Ambition 2010. It was an idea of filmmakers, and it became the flagship of this television channel's project for the 2010 national elections. So what happened was they invited 20 filmmakers that they believed can represent a Philippine independent film scene that has a stake in the state of the nation. around the time the ANC, or this television channel, was very much open to the exploration of new grounds in storytelling, specifically documentaries in television. It was envisioned to be a sort of an answer to the uncertainties and promises of the elections, and was described to be about the dreams of a nation, about hope, possibility, and truth through the lenses of the filmmakers. So I was invited along with Filipino filmmakers from different genre like fiction, documentary. There was even animation films. Ambition included Ditsi Carolino, Jade Castro, Eric Mati, Brillante Mendoza, Ellen Ramos, John Red, Raymond Red, Gerald Tarog, John Torres, Jeffrey Duturian, et al. We were asked to make films that tackle the 10 core issues of corruption, democracy, economy, education, human rights, health, justice, population, poverty, security, and insurgency. And given an amount of 30,000 pesos, or less than $1,000, to make 5 to 10 minute short films. At that time, I decided to make a short film called Requiem for M. But instead of the straightforward documentary, which was expected of me, I decided to expand the telling of a story of a very painful incident in our history. So this is a video still from of a couple. They are the parents, the 70-plus-year-old parents of Anthony Ridao, one civilian who just happened to be in the same highway and was included in the massacre. So when I was there and was shooting, I remember following them. They were 70 years old and walking in this very difficult uphill path. And I kept thinking about how that they shouldn't be here. We all shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be in this. These 70-year-old couple should be back home. Instead of the idea of us, like in my case, that was the last thing that I wanted to be doing, to be covering another violent massacre. So I decided to create a short film So I decided to not simply record or retell the incident, but I wanted to commemorate the lives lost by registering in filmic language my rejection and abhorrence to the situation that we ordinary Filipinos were placed in the Philippines. So Requiem for M begins in black, followed by the image of a dirt road in Sitio Masalay, Barangay Salman, Ampatuan, Maguindanao, where over 100 armed men led 58 individuals, including the 32 journalists, to their deaths. Okay, I will show this is a 4-minute excerpt. Yep.
Tama na yun, ang dami na nilang pinatay. Ang dami na, tama na yun. Tama na yung maraming taong nasaktan. Yung mga pamilya na iwan ng biktima. Alam ba nila kung ano nararamdaman namin ngayon? Ilang beses kami pinapatay. Kaya ako sumisigaw ako, tumatapang ako dahil sa kanilang lahat na namatay dito. Kailan tayo kikilos? Kailan natin gugustuhin na matapos ang ganitong mga pangyayari? Gusto nila manatili sila sa power, manatili sila na kumuha ng maraming pera. Pera lang ang lahat ng ito, ng power. Pera lang lahat. Ang katapat ng ito lahat, pera. Putang inang pera na yan. Putang ina ng pera na yan.
So that's an excerpt from Requiem for M. I purposely, I didn't have the subtitles, but that was the voice of the widow of Mirna Reblando, the widow of Manila Bulletin correspondent Bong Reblando. And in his body was one of the first found, and I wanted to encapsulate in that few minutes the anger and the hurt. But this is a bit of a translation. Enough of this, too many have been killed, too many have been hurt. We are being killed over and over again. The reason why I am shouting and becoming braver is because of those who were killed. When will we act? When will we truly want to end this? This is happening all because of they want to remain in power. This is because they want to amass a lot of money. Money is behind all this. Power and money is the root of all this. Fuck money. Okay, so that's the video. So thank you very much.